See, it is doable, but depending on how this is going to be carried out, there are a few options that the administration can actually consider. One is to, of course, follow the same model that they've done with Huawei and ZTE by putting, let's say, WeChat, for example, on the Department of Commerce's entity list. In that case, basically, any U.S. businesses that would supply to these companies will have to apply for an exemption or pay a fine. So that would effectively deter the U.S. companies, in this case, Apple and Google, who run the two largest app stores in the world, to do business with, let's say, TikTok or WeChat. Another way to go is a bit uncertain. As you would recall, back in May 2019, President Trump announced an executive order that would give the Department of Commerce the ability to, again, determine, which software ICT services would pose a national security threat to the U.S. And so far, there has been no use of this new executive order. And based on what Secretary Pompeo said, it could be a first case in which this new executive order is applied. But, that's still uncertain. So, there are ways for the U.S. government to really cause pain on WeChat and other Chinese apps, for that matter. But how this is going to actually happen is still sort of a question mark.
So we keep hearing this term, national security issues, concerns about national security. TikTok and WeChat have been around for a long time. So if it's really about national security, the national security threat has existed for a while. So why would they do this? Why would the Trump administration do this now?
Well, I think it's obvious that there is a bit of consideration for November elections. The president needs to sort of build up the China threat within the domestic audience, and he also has to sort of bring this threat back to home. It's not just a threat that's tens of thousands of miles away, but it's something that's, say, installed in our phones. So he needs sort of to establish these targets, and the timing, it's hard not to argue that these actions are not contributing to the re-election campaign of President Trump. But again, one analogy, if I may draw, sort of analogy between technology data and, let's say, nuclear power back in the 50s. I think, we're spending a lot of time talking about how these can be turned into a weapon or how to weaponize data, the threats of data. But what we should rather be doing instead be doing is to, really consider how to best use data and what are the potential risks. Because if you look at the power of data that's held by governments, not just Chinese, but U.S. government, European governments, it's something that's quite unknown to mankind as a whole. And how do we really leverage the power of data instead of turning it into a threat to privacy and to humanity? It's something that I think both China and the U.S. should probably spend more time discussing.
And what is all this, Sean, going to do to the already strained relationship between the world's two largest economies?
Well, I think you're going to definitely see a bit more caution from actually not just China, but from any other country that want to invest in the U.S. or want to do business in the U.S. because these so-called bans or forced sales do make precedents happen, and they will sound an alarm to Chinese investors, to even European investors and investors elsewhere when they consider working with U.S. counterparts, working with U.S. talent, working with U.S. technology companies. So I think this will definitely send a chill throughout the technology sector and the private sector. So it would be really up to the two governments to figure out how to build a constructive framework for these sort of exchanges instead of jumping to the conclusions and jumping to sort of weaponizing data before really realizing how to turn it into benefit to mankind.